I didn't disappear all at once. I faded. Slowly. Carefully. Like someone learning how to leave without making noise. If you had looked at my life from the outside, you would have said nothing was wrong. That was the problem. Nothing was wrong enough for anyone to stop me. No accident. No scandal. No dramatic collapse. Just a quiet, acceptable existence that slowly strangled me while everyone called it stability. The night everything began, I was sitting in my car, engine off, hands on the steering wheel, staring at my own front door. The porch light was on. Someone had left it on for me. Or maybe it was on a timer. I couldn't remember anymore. I stayed there for 43 minutes. I know because I checked the clock every few minutes, hoping time would make the decision for me. It didn't. Time never does. It just watches. Inside that house was the life I had built by doing what I was supposed to do. The right job. The right routines. The right compromises. Years of saying later to myself until later quietly expired. I wasn't running away from something dramatic. I was running away from repetition. From waking up already tired. From conversations that sounded rehearsed. From a mirror that reflected someone who looked responsible and felt empty. That night, my phone buzzed. A message from someone who loved me in the way people love furniture they've owned for years. Dependable. Familiar. Replaceable, eventually. "Are you coming in?" the message said. I typed back, "In a minute." I didn't go in. Instead, I drove. No destination. Just movement. Just the hum of the road and the strange relief of not being expected somewhere for the next few minutes. I told myself I would come back. That this was just a pause. A breath. That's the lie we tell ourselves when we're afraid to admit we're done. I drove until the city thinned out, until streetlights became occasional suggestions, until the radio lost signal and started whispering static like a confession it couldn't quite finish. Somewhere on that road, I realized something terrifying. No one was calling. Not immediately. Not urgently. No panic. No fear. Just silence. The kind of silence that tells you the world will continue just fine without your participation. That's when the guilt arrived. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just heavy. Settling into my chest like a weight I would carry for years. I thought about turning around. I did. My turn signal clicked for a full minute before I switched it off again. You see, leaving is easy in theory. It's the staying gone that destroys you. I didn't disappear that night. I went back. Of course I did. I slept in my own bed. I woke up the next morning. I made coffee. I answered questions. I smiled at the right moments. I played my role so convincingly that even I almost believed it. But something had cracked. From that moment on, every day felt like borrowed time. Like I was living on credit, emotionally. Every laugh felt delayed. Every promise felt dishonest. I started noticing how often I said, "I'm fine," without checking if it was true. How often I agreed just to end conversations faster. How my dreams had become smaller, quieter, easier to ignore. There was a moment, months later, when someone asked me where I saw myself in 5 years. I froze. Not because I didn't have an answer. But because the answer terrified me. I saw myself exactly where I was. Slightly older. Slightly more tired. Slightly more invisible. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there listening to someone else breathe, realizing how lonely you can be without ever being alone. That was when the moral dilemma began. Not the dramatic kind. Not good versus evil. Comfort versus truth. If I stayed, I would hurt myself slowly and spare everyone else pain. If I left, I would survive, and destroy the version of me everyone else depended on. There is no clean choice in situations like that. Only consequences you choose to live with. I began preparing quietly. Not physically. Mentally. I practiced letting go in small ways. I stopped correcting people when they misunderstood me. I stopped sharing thoughts that mattered. I learned how to become forgettable without being rude. And the strangest part? No one noticed. People rarely notice when you start disappearing. They notice when you make noise. When you ask for help too loudly. When your pain inconveniences them. Quiet suffering is socially acceptable. One evening, I stood in the bathroom, staring at my reflection, and tried to remember the last time I felt proud of myself. Not relieved. Not accomplished. Proud. I couldn't. That's when I understood, I wasn't afraid of leaving. I was afraid of being remembered incorrectly. I didn't want to be the villain. I didn't want to be the selfish one. I didn't want to be the person people whispered about. So I decided to erase myself instead. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Carefully. Erasing yourself doesn't start with leaving. It starts with staying longer than you should. I stayed for another year. A full year of doing everything right while feeling absolutely wrong. I learned how to live on autopilot. Wake up. Shower. Eat. Work. Smile. Nod. Sleep. Repeat. Days stopped having edges. Weeks blurred together like wet paint. People complimented me during that time. That's the cruelest part. You seem calmer lately. You've matured. You're so stable. They didn't know calm was just exhaustion that had given up on protest. They didn't know maturity sometimes means burying parts of yourself deep enough that they stop screaming. Inside, I was negotiating with myself constantly. Just one more month. Just get through this season. Just wait until things feel clearer. Clarity never comes to people who refuse to move. The more invisible I became emotionally, the more functional my life looked from the outside. I was praised for my reliability. Trusted. Depended on. Needed, but not known. That's a dangerous place to live. Because when you're needed but not known, leaving feels like betrayal even if staying is a slow suicide. I remember the exact moment I understood I would eventually disappear for real. It was a small moment. Insignificant to anyone else. Someone asked me a personal question, something simple, and I lied without thinking. Not to protect myself. Not to avoid conflict. I lied because the truth felt irrelevant. Like it wouldn't land anywhere meaningful. And when I realized that, something inside me went quiet. That's the sound of detachment settling in. I started imagining alternative versions of myself. Not better. Just different. Someone who lived in a smaller place. Someone who answered to no one. Someone who could wake up without rehearsing who they were supposed to be that day. At first, it felt like fantasy. Harmless. Escapism. Then it started feeling like planning. I stopped buying things that tied me down. I cleaned my digital footprint. Old accounts. Old photos. Old messages. I told myself it was decluttering. It wasn't. It was preparation. The guilt was constant. Not sharp, dull. Like background noise you forget until the power goes out and you realize it was always there. I felt guilty for wanting more. Guilty for wanting less. Guilty for wanting anything at all. That's how you know you've stayed too long in a life that doesn't fit, when desire itself feels like a crime. There were moments I almost confessed everything. Nights where I rehearsed speeches in my head. Honest ones. Brutal ones. The kind that would shatter the version of me people trusted. I never delivered them. Because honesty doesn't always heal. Sometimes it just redistributes pain. And I wasn't brave enough to be the source of that pain yet. Instead, I became emotionally efficient. I said just enough. Gave just enough. Showed up just enough. I began to notice how replaceable I was. Not immediately. Not obviously. But subtly. Tasks reassigned. Decisions made without me. Conversations continuing just fine when I stayed quiet. That should have hurt. Instead, it relieved me. That's when I understood something terrifying. The world wasn't holding on to me. I was holding on to it. And I was tired. The final months before I left were strangely peaceful. Once you accept that you're going to leave, everything becomes temporary. Arguments lose their teeth. Annoyances stop mattering. You start observing instead of participating. I watched people I loved plan futures I knew I wouldn't be part of. I nodded. I smiled. I memorized their faces the way you memorize places before moving away. Sometimes, late at night, I asked myself the hardest question: am I running away, or am I finally walking toward myself? There's no honest answer to that when you're still inside the cage. The night I decided the exact date, I didn't feel dramatic. I felt practical. I sat down and wrote 2 lists. What I would lose. What I would gain. The first list was longer. People. History. Familiarity. A version of myself that others loved. The second list had only one line. Silence. Not peace. Not happiness. Silence. Room to hear my own thoughts again. That was enough. I didn't announce anything. I didn't give ultimatums. I didn't start fights to justify leaving. I chose the most cowardly and most merciful option at the same time. I planned to disappear quietly. No explosion. No confession. Just absence. The hardest part wasn't packing. It wasn't logistics. It wasn't fear. It was looking at people I loved and knowing they would remember me as someone who chose not to explain. And still choosing to go. The morning I left, nothing felt symbolic. No dramatic sunrise. No racing heartbeat. No sense of destiny. Just routine. That's what made it terrifying. I woke up before my alarm, stared at the ceiling, and waited for doubt to arrive. It didn't. Doubt had exhausted itself long before that day. What remained was a strange, fragile calm, the kind that feels like emotional numbness wearing a peaceful mask. I showered. I dressed. I packed the last few things that still felt like mine. Not important things. Not sentimental ones. Just objects that hadn't absorbed too much history. I left a note. Not an explanation. Not an apology. Just a sentence that said I needed time to understand who I was when no one needed me. I read it twice. Then I folded it and placed it where it would be found easily. That was the last considerate thing I did as that version of myself. Walking out the door felt ordinary. That's the lie movies tell you, that leaving your life feels monumental. In reality, it feels like forgetting something important and only realizing it once you're already too far away to turn back. I didn't look behind me. Not because I was strong. Because I knew if I did, I wouldn't leave. The first weeks were disorienting. Freedom is louder than people think. Without expectations pressing in from all sides, your own thoughts start echoing. Old fears surface. Old regrets demand attention. I moved to a place where no one knew me. Where my name meant nothing. Where my past didn't arrive before I did. At first, I felt invisible. Then I realized invisibility was the point. I slept strange hours. Ate when I was hungry instead of when it was appropriate. Walked without destinations. I started listening to my body again, to my instincts, something I hadn't done in years. But peace didn't come right away. Guilt followed me like a shadow. Every quiet moment reminded me of the people I hurt by leaving without answers. Every moment of relief came with a price tag attached. There were nights I stared at my phone, hovering over familiar names, imagining the conversations I would never have. What would I even say? I left because I was dying quietly. I stayed too long and became someone I hated. I didn't trust you with my truth. None of those sounded kind. So I stayed silent. Silence became my new language. Months passed. Then more. Slowly, something inside me started to return, not happiness, but honesty. I noticed how my reactions became genuine again. How laughter surprised me instead of feeling scheduled. How sadness came and went without attaching itself to shame. I began to understand the cost of my choice. I had saved myself, but I had also lost the right to be understood by people who once loved me. That's the price of disappearing. You don't get to control the story people tell about you. Some probably think I was selfish. Others assume I was unstable. Some might believe I found something better. The truth is less dramatic. I found something quieter. And in that quiet, I finally faced the question I had been running for my entire life. Was the life I left actually wrong, or was I just afraid to change inside it? There's no clean answer. Some days, I believe leaving was the bravest thing I've ever done. Other days, it feels like a beautifully disguised failure. I rebuilt myself slowly. Not into a new person, into a more honest one. I learned what loneliness actually feels like when it's chosen. I learned that freedom doesn't fix you. It just gives you space to fix yourself. I still think about the porch light sometimes. Whether it's still on. Whether someone still expects me to walk through that door. Whether time eventually softened the confusion I left behind. I don't know. What I do know is this: you can live an entire life doing what's right and still feel completely lost. You can love people deeply and still need to leave them behind to survive. You can disappear without being a villain, but you will never be innocent. If you're listening to this and wondering whether it's too late to choose differently, here's the truth I learned the hard way: it's never too late to restart. But it's always too late to restart without consequences. The goal isn't to avoid regret. It's to choose the regret you can live with. I chose mine. And every day, I wake up knowing exactly why I'm here. Not because I found happiness. Not because I escaped pain. But because, for the first time, the life I'm living actually belongs to me. And that, quietly, imperfectly, is enough.